Mahogany Rise Primary School is in a very low socioeconomic area of Frankston, in Frankston North. It's generally called the Pines. It has a high degree of need across a number of areas. We had a review in the first year and it talked about this school being chronically depressed, which was probably a fairly accurate statement of what was happening in the school. So that then set some benchmark levels for us. It set a sort of a tone. Well, okay, if we're to make some change or some improvement at this school, what do we need to be doing and what do we need to target to actually make some changes? So the first year we had lots of data collected and we had previous data. And so then we saw, okay, what's the highest need? And if we're going to make the biggest impact on students' lives, then what do we need to do? Well, we came to the conclusion that if they can all read and be literate, then that's the biggest thing we can achieve with these students. So that then became our clear focus and our clear mandate and our mantra for this school. We looked at what the programs are in operation in the school, and we needed to then have a look at what was happening in each of the classrooms to make sure that was there a good literacy program happening? Was there a coherent sort of school understanding about what was happening in the classrooms? And probably we discovered that we thought that the school was in a fair bit of chaos and that there wasn't any clear direction coming from within the teaching environment. And so therefore we really tightened up in the first year around, okay, what do we want a good literacy program to look like at Mahogany Rise Primary School? But it's about coming back to what's the core job of the teacher in the classroom? What's the core job of them every day? And for me, it's around literacy. And it's about teaching literacy. We also had a teaching and learning coach come in the first year in their 3 to 6s, and that made a lot of difference because it gave the teachers somebody to bounce off, somebody was observing them teaching, probably for the first time for some people in 20 to 5 years of teaching, with giving them specific feedback and helping them to understand, I think, some of the nuances of being a really good literacy teacher and a learner in their own classrooms. So that meant that we really had a clear focus in each of the classrooms, and that meant that the students then were engaged a whole lot more in their own education. And so we then set about raising the bar for the teachers, we raised the bar for the students, and we raised the bar for the parents, so that there was this really clear partnership between all three, and that meant that everybody was becoming part of a really new learning community. At the same time, we also looked at the social competencies program in the school, because there'd been a range of things tried and programs tried, but we ended up working with the Tribes program, and that really keyed into the oral language. In setting targets for improvement at Mahogany Rise, we've tried to work on because we're a small school and percentages can sometimes be skewed positively and negatively, and so we've really worked on a much more individual-based learning program so that we collect a lot more data about individual students. We know exactly where the students are up to, where they were 6 months ago, where they were 3 months ago, where they were a year and a half ago, so that we can track the students almost individually through the system, and we know that and then what's the next step for these students. We have to measure the growth. We have to measure the value adding that we're doing, so that we're not comparing ourselves apples to apples all the time. We're comparing ourselves to the growth that the individuals are making. We measure the growth in students in whatever way we can, so that it can be through on-demand testing, it can be through the NAPLAN data, it can be through the speech pathology program. We do moderated with writing pieces. Anything that moves, we'll datarise it so that we have a very clear picture of what's happening for the individual student. And so you can see a remarkable change in the way in which the teachers have approached the use of data, and then that in fact engages the students, because the students know they're doing their on-demand testing for a reason. They want to see whether they've made improvement over the last 6 months. And so the kids get engaged in that process as well. Once we saw that students became engaged in understanding where they were up to, they then begin to say, well, okay, what's the next steps? And so they begin to focus on not just the outcomes for the testing regime, but to see that they feel good about being a part of the educational process. I think teachers are much more accountable for what's happening in their classrooms, that you can't sort of hide from the data. You can't hide from the fact that if you've got responsibility to improve the learning of the students that are in your charge, your care, that teachers, there's a much more heightened awareness about that. We have an enormous amount of students with DHS attachments. That takes up a lot of time, it can take up a lot of time, it has taken up a lot of time, but we've been able to build in some other support processes so that the teachers are not necessarily the front line in dealing with those issues. So we have the support services of Fusion Australia, we have the support services ARDOC, we have Noah's Ark on site as well. So therefore we have a chaplain 4 days a week. And that means then that a lot of those key welfare issues which affect the outcomes of the students, because we know when kids come to school stressed, they don't focus on their learning. So we actually have to provide all of these other services to help de-stress the kids so that they then can actually focus on their learning outcomes, and the teachers can focus on their core job, which is teaching. In terms of our parent engagement and our community development, I'm really have moved to a much more sort of community transformational sort of model, or a thinking sort of way of approaching how we're here, how we're working in this environment. I really push the fact that we need to be very hospitable in this area. That I've said to staff quite a lot, this is us inviting people into our lounge rooms. That's the way I want people to feel about walking into the school, that they are being invited into my home. And I think it's a very complex sort of mixture of things that are required to keep being unrelenting in bringing about change, and unrelenting in keeping your foot on the pedal or keeping the foot on people's throats, to say, okay, how can we keep going? How can we keep improving? And how do we keep turning things over so that we're not missing anything along the way? You need to have a coherent vision, that you need to have a vision that's very clear, that everybody is able to resonate with that vision, and that people need to be committed to that vision, and you need to then keep following through with that vision.